So I'm Anton Kril, I'm Director of Architecture in Magento. If you wonder what does Director of Architecture in Magento do, I already answered that question to Alan today. Mostly answer emails, approve time-off requests, and between those things, I have to think about future, analyze situation, what's happening, and think about how we should change our behavior, what we should do with our applications to react better to application and to ship better tooling for merchants, our clients, right? So I'll be dumping some of my thoughts, some of the things that me and my team, we are thinking about, things that we plan actually to implement, that we are all now designing, prototyping, and distributing work for. So it's actually the project that Magento is committed to do already, right? So it's not just some high-level plan. It's a high-level design for committed plan, okay? So the problem we're trying to solve, the current state. Like you probably notice it together with us, that applications grow in complexity. It's harder to understand them. Merchant implementations grow in complexity. Today, a Magento installation has integrations with 5, 6, 7, 10 systems, right? And it has hundreds of customizations, tens of extensions and stuff like that, right? This, of course, pushes for longer release cycles for merchants, which creates a problem because it's harder for merchants to experiment and react to market requests, right? And it limits their non-price competition capabilities, right? So we want to be the platform that is very easy for people to use, that people don't, that people can use without being afraid of their growth, of their future capabilities for growth, or future capabilities for replacement, for migration and stuff. So fortunately, we at Magento as a commerce company, we've been on market for a while, and the industry changed pretty significantly since Magento was released, right? And many people before us thought about all of these problems, and they come up with a lot of solutions. So there is nothing super new in what I'll be talking about. That is something people are doing, and we'll be doing that too because it makes sense, right? So our general solution, again, as I said, nothing very smart there. More than 10 years ago, people started to move towards service isolation. Later, they refined that architecture type, and more people are talking about microservices. Service-oriented architecture, now talking about microservices. We don't want to talk about microservices because there will be speculations about the sizes of services that we plan to build. So we just call it service isolation project. So isolate the services of Magento and allow you to deploy different services independently, right? Makes sense? I barely can see people. So service isolation is one thing, it's a huge thing that we plan to do, and I'll be talking more details about it. Of course, it will require us to become better at DevOps, right? So it will require better tooling, better out-of-box configuration, devboxes, and other Magento-specific tools, right? And of course, better testing with all of the variations, with the distributed implementation. All the variations that you have to test will grow. Right? So manually, you will not be able to test that all manually. And to achieve main goal, to have short release cycles, you have to automate, right? So this is our, okay, so that's what you see. So this is the link to our design subsection on our architecture repository where we are discussing all of these things, and we'll be discussing more and more and more. Please pay attention to this. If this is important for you, if this is something that you are interested in, pay attention, go there, participate in discussions. This is a good time to jump there and influence how we do stuff. We have a lot of opinions, but we are happy to change opinions as feedback comes in. Like, by the way, last year in Australia, we presented the design for GraphQL, and Karen Baker was, so the declaration for GraphQL was in XML. It wasn't released yet. And Karen Baker was, she gave very strong feedback. She didn't like the fact that it's GraphQL. In a month, we already released a version of GraphQL that is declared with SDL. So we listen to you, we get your feedback, come there, and give your feedback. Okay, so now in short, this is how Magento application conceptually looks today. A monolithic application, two main entry points, admin and storefront, right? Talking through action controllers, server-side rendering, exposing REST APIs. Monolithic PHP application that is modular, right? So you have different features in different packages, but they are all deployed together. You can extract, check out, and order management database from the main database, right? Right. We have three main editions: open source, commerce, and B2B, right? And on top of that, you can go download your extensions and write your customizations. So this is the scheme of Magento application. In short, we are adding GraphQL as a step towards with 2.3 that is coming soon. We are as a step towards something we plan to do next, the desired state that I will be describing, right? So here is a desired state, right? Every box here is a separate instance, right? Ability for you to deploy every service independently. Of course, we will not do that in one step. We will be doing it. We will be releasing it one service at a time, right? Every service by design is required to have its own data storage, independent from other storages, right? Some important aspects here is the storefront is a PWA application. This is the first step. So our PWA is actually the first step of our modularity epic. It allows you to, it decouples UI from backend, right? So it gives you huge, even with this migration, it gives you huge abilities to experiment and deploy application to be more agile, deploy application in smaller chunks. Like, for example, someone yesterday mentioned how they plan to migrate Magento 1 instance to Magento 2 by first implementing a PWA storefront on Magento 2 that will talk to Magento 1 instance and then switch to Magento 2 instance, right? It might be not as easy to do, but it's much easier than migrating full application at one time, right? The other important thing here is that the concept of CQRS, or Common Query Responsibility Segregation. We know that we have admin scenarios like editing products, editing stock, editing promotions, and we have storefront scenarios like viewing catalog, adding product to cart, buying stuff, right? So product data, catalog data is mutable for admin scenarios, right? So that's why we plan to have a catalog management service. But it is immutable for storefront scenarios, right? So we plan to separate those services. We already have that in application today in form of indexing. We have source tables and we have index tables, and we have indexation that aggregates that data, right? So we plan to go further that path and explicitly split that. I've been talking about it for a while already, and we add more and more indexing and more data separation. This data will have very clear boundaries. One more important thing, not to forget to mention, that we will the plan, at least for today, is to support a monolithic deployment also. Right? So for a merchant that is very small, that doesn't care about being very agile or being very scalable, they just want one instance. They don't want to pay all the price of managing distributed application. So we plan to support both distributed deployment model and monolithic deployment model. That plan might change tomorrow, but it happens. So for now, the plan is this. Okay. Hopefully this is clear. This is Bright Future. It allows you to deploy different services independently. It allows you to migrate different services to independently. So for example, if you know that you you know you want to build a store that will have very advanced inventory management, right, or catalog management, and you don't know if Magento will be suitable for you. It's so what you do today, you have to think about it. Is Magento suitable or not? Tomorrow, with this model, you don't have to care about it. You deploy Magento today, and tomorrow you just replace catalog instance with external service, and that's it, right? Okay, so go next. So now the price for this. It's all great. The price is we are building the distributed system, distributed application. And network is a very scary place to be in because it promises a lot less than in-process communication between promises. It promises a lot less stability, guarantees of delivery, performance, latency, throughput, and stuff. So if in process call, you call a function and you know that function will be there with very high probability, in network calls, you don't know. Even if your remote service is down, it's a good situation for you because you will fail fast. More problems if that service is hanging and it's slow. That will slow down all of your application. You'll have cascading failures, right? So these are the famous fallacies of distributed computing. You can find it on Wikipedia. People think that very often developers who come from in-process communication to over the network communication do a lot of assumptions about network. We have to think about these things, and many people thought about them before us. So they come up with a bunch of stability patterns, like timeouts, circuit breakers, bulkheads. There is a lot more. I will not go through all of them, but I'll explain some important ones. Like timeouts, you have service A and you have service B. Service A behaves well, so it can handle load. Service B cannot handle load, you see? It's sad. So when all of the client requests come to service A, it processes its part and then does the request to service B to retrieve some segment of data, right? And because this service B cannot handle that load, it responds slowly, right? So all these connections hang, right? So what do you have to do? You have to always think about timeouts. You have to kill those connections if they hang. Otherwise, your service A will also, that's how you protect your service A from dying, because your service A will be blocked waiting for all of those connections, right? Circuit breaker. So basically, if you have same situation, service B doesn't feel well, with all of the connections that you will be sending to service B, you will be making it feel even worse, right, if you will be loading. So the people came up with a pattern called circuit breaker that checks for response time from downstream service, and if it doesn't respond, it just stops all the future connections. So it just says, okay, I know that that service is down, I will not even try to ask for it. The other thing is bulkhead that splits your service application resources to multiple clients, so it doesn't allow one single client to kill whole service. There is a lot of complexity about it. I think there is a bunch of books that you can read about it when you will be working with distributed Magento, like building microservices, release it, designing data-intensive applications. This is all very interesting, and you should read that if you're a developer. A lot of things here, a lot of these patterns, people already came up with solutions. Instead of making a developer that writes a service to think about all of these stability patterns in communication, they came up with a solution. You don't want a library in your service. You want your services to be independent, right? So and you don't want in every service to think about timeouts, retries, circuit breakers. So what do they offer? In your, for example, catalog service, you don't care about all of this. You talk to a separate small service that runs on same machine called service mesh. And that service is responsible for all of this communication, for all of the stability patterns. Anyway, this is something we are thinking about to simplify development and distributed the deployment for Magento developers. Other thing that the instability of network brings overall distributed deployment brings to us is that our data is also distributed. So I hope everybody knows the CAP theorem here, which says that between consistency, availability, and partition tolerance, you can only choose two, right? But in reality, we know that partition tolerance is not an option anymore. With hardware being, with current cloud computing, you have to have your data and your applications partitioned. So you can only choose between CP and AP, right? So in that case, you cannot anymore talk to a single instance of MySQL server, right? If in the example of multi-master replication, synchronous multi-master replication in MySQL, it's partition tolerant, and it's consistent, but it's not available because if one master goes down, you will not get response from the other master, right? So what we will have to think about all of it, don't worry if this is a bit complicated, but the simple summary from this is that we will have to move towards eventual consistency. Today, Magento is designed with consistency with transactions in mind. Even in situations when consistency is not as required, we still run everything in transactions, and we are overusing that not always useful abstraction of transactions, right? So taking all of it into account, we've designed a bunch of service design principles, like all operations must be idempotent. Idempotent operation is basically retriable, right? So again, network is unreliable. We don't know if connections, how many times message will be delivered. We want to do retries. So every operation should be retriable, right? Sagas and confirmation timeouts. It's like, for example, if you place an order and you want to place an order, you want to first decrement stock and then place order. If you already decremented stock and then order place operation failed, you want to undo the operation of decrement stock. You can do it with so-called compensating transaction or with timeout if you didn't confirm, yes, I really want to keep that stock decremented. All new service contracts should be asynchronous. Again, network is a very scary place. You want to stay there as little as possible. All new state modifying operations expose bulk APIs. We don't want to do many network calls. And data dependencies, again, it's a general microservice design principle. There must be no data dependencies between services, right? And I already mentioned command query responsibility segregation principle, right? One more important thing, CAS. We will be for all services we are thinking to introduce check and swap token that will not allow, that will fight race conditions. When two admins edit product, you will not be able to rewrite if the product was changed after you read the state of that product. Okay. Important thing to mention: module split. Every module should be deployable on different instances, right? It means that current catalog has at least 5 or 6 modules in it today. So admin UI should be a separate module, catalog API separate module, catalog implementation separate module. So this will require extensions and modules to be split, right? Lightweight framework. We thought about it. If you want to build microservices, you need much lighter framework than for monolith application. Area doesn't need to be loaded twice. Today we load global, then specific area. We don't need to check for it is installed if a module doesn't install database. No store resolving, no application classes like HTTP console class. It's all heavyweight for very small microservice. We will need a different request object than we need today. No layout if you don't render anything. No URL rewrite and simplified routing, right? And one more thing I want to kill, registration PHP. So many more changes will be there. Now devbox. Important thing is that you want to have unified environment on your development and your production. Today we experiment with Kubernetes, Minikube. Minikube is breaking my heart, to be honest. It's very hard to make it work very well, but we will do that. We plan to do to allow you to have same environment on your local machine and your production. Kubernetes has won the orchestration war, and it's also now supported by all cloud computing platforms. You'll need some other tooling that will allow you to manage multiple instances of Magento from your development machine. I already published the repository with such tool. Please go there, take a look, contribute. We are designing this tool. If you manage multiple instances, this will be very useful for you, right? Now, the last thing, so I talked about tooling, the last thing is testing. Manual testing is not an option anymore, so please use MFTF. We plan to use MFTF on Marketplace to check extensions, on cloud to check upgrades and general changes, and we plan to add capacity testing capabilities to MFTF. Please, it's very important to use MFTF for future of Magento and Magento ecosystem. So we plan to also reduce work in progress. Instead of releasing big changes every minor release, we plan to release, like same as we did with GraphQL, when we release a module separately and iterate it in parallel with big release, and then we just include that module in big release. We did it with GraphQL. We released modules earlier, and then just will include it with 2.3 release. Okay, so back to our main goal, taking into account, as you probably saw, I just ran quickly through all of the complexities that we will have to solve, but you can see that there is a lot of them. But the ultimate goal is to provide agile tools for merchants for them to be able to iterate and experiment and compete with their competition successfully. So that was it. I'm Anton Kril. Go to this repository, leave your feedback. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anton. We got time for a couple of questions. Anyone have any questions for Anton? I see a hand up all the way over there. It's all fun and games till someone breaks the hip.
So you mentioned that one of the key benefits to this is that you'll be able to iterate faster and be more agile with the releases. Is the long-term vision that you'll have you had a slide up there, but I didn't fully get it. Is the long-term vision that you'll have more rapid releases of the individual service modules, or will they all be bundled into a major platform release? Yeah,
he cut my time. I had to run through this quickly. So yes, that's the goal. When we work on new service, at least I'll be pushing for releasing every service after 2 weeks. We start working on it, and then iterating on it. Keep it in alpha phase for a while, then beta, then release candidate, and then when we are ready to release it, just release big minor version of Magento where this module will be included, right? Ideally, my dream is where Magento publishes new versions of its modules every day, and then you just upgrade it. That is something I'll be pushing for, because I believe that minification of work in progress reduces waste and overall solves a lot of problems. I don't know if you read Phoenix project, that it explains all of the things, how modern DevOps can solve a lot of problems. I think Magento has field for improvement there, and yes, this strategy should be improving that. So we try to make agile Magento, more rapid releases for Magento commerce, and allow you with this tooling, Kubernetes and stuff, allow you as ICE to do more rapid releases when you already received Magento platform, do more rapid releases to production of specific stores. That's a very long answer.
Be sure to look for Anton around the show for more questions. We got time for one more before we leave the stage. Anyone have one more question? Oh, I see a hand up over there.
Hi. Do you consider to use like a public, more like a public, like a message service, like a Azure or like a AWS has their own like a message queue service to do the communication between microservice? Okay, so that's what I mentioned here. So it's not completely decided here, but this slide was about it. So message queue decouple services and allow, so why queues are good, it's first part. Because they decouple place and time, services in place and time. You send message on one service, consume it, and react to it on different service. Because queues are asynchronous, they decouple also in time, which is good because you don't want to rely on blocking calls in network communication. Why queues are problematic? Because it's usually it's a single point of failure in the architecture of your platform. That's why many people. That's one of the reasons many people don't rely on queues for inter-service communication and rely on peer-to-peer communication. But peer-to-peer communication
has a lot of complexities, making it asynchronous, retries, timeouts, and stuff. That's why people came up with service mesh, ability where services don't bother with all of that complexity. They just delegate the complexity of over network communication to service mesh. So thank you for that question. I had to run through it. It allowed me to explain it a bit better.